What's going on, everybody? Welcome to After Prison Show, and today is day number 19 of our 20-day prison story marathon. Tomorrow we are wrapping this thing up, and it's really been awesome to be able to tell you guys all of these crazy prison stories throughout the course of this marathon. And real quick, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has rocked with all of these prison stories that we've told throughout this. And before we dive into today's prison story video, I do want to tell you guys this. If you haven't had a chance to check out vid.me/AfterPrisonJoe, please do so, because we're doing some really awesome things over there as well. In this prison story video, I want to tell you guys what it was like to go through a hurricane while locked up in prison. And unfortunately, now seems like a pretty good time to tell this story, considering that while looking at the weather, there's 3 hurricanes out there right now. I mean, looking at a weather map, it almost seems like the end of days out there. Hurricane Harvey just hit and caused so much damage down in Texas. And to anybody who has been affected by Hurricane Harvey or this other Hurricane Irma that's taking place right now, the condolences of After Prison Show go out to all of you. You know, going through a hurricane is bad and scary enough, but just imagine having to do that while locked up inside of a prison. And to be honest with you, anything that you have to experience while locked up, I mean, it's gonna be a million times worse. Nothing that you will ever have to go through while in prison will ever be better than dealing with that as a free person out in the free world. And hurricanes are certainly no exception to that. Back in September of 2003, during one of the many damn times that I spent locked up in my life, there was a pretty bad hurricane that hit during this time, known as Hurricane Isabel. And this sucker was a beast, and at its peak, it reached a Category 5. But it was during this time, back in September of 2003, when this hurricane first formed out in the Atlantic and was then being predicted to come right in the direction of where I was then locked up at, that all of the other prisoners who were watching this as well on the news began to talk amongst themselves of just what was going to happen if this hurricane was to pass over where we were then locked up at. And during this time, I had never been locked up during a hurricane, so I had no idea what to expect if this thing was to hit. But when I heard all of these other prisoners talking about, maybe these guys had been through things like this before, but everything that I was hearing, I mean, it sounded pretty damn crazy. They were talking about how we would be placed on lockdown, how the phones would be cut off. I mean, it would almost be like being locked up in isolation, in solitary confinement, or the hole, which to me, as I'm hearing this, sounds like the worst place that you could possibly experience, going through a storm that could cause major damage, flooding. Hell, there might even be a possibility that you could drown in your cell. I mean, I was scared to death listening to these guys talk about all these probabilities and what ifs and hypothetical situations that could arise if this hurricane was to hit us. But something else that I heard these guys mention if this hurricane was to hit us was that we would all be evacuated to a different facility somewhere out of the reach and path of this storm. And if we were to be transferred to another prison, then it would be like the entire prison population housed inside that prison's gym. Inside a prison gym, 1,000 prisoners to be housed in there with one single bathroom. And you know, I gotta be honest with you, sometimes I get claustrophobia. I definitely suffer from anxiety. So just thinking of being transferred to this other prison where over 1,000 prisoners would be housed inside of this little small gym with one bathroom. I mean, I was definitely dealing with some major anxiety thinking about all of this. Over the course of what was probably like a week as this storm was coming closer to us, Hurricane Isabel ended up turning more northwards, and when we were hit, we were only hit by like an outside corner of this hurricane. And as the weather maps were showing this hurricane making that more northward turn, I'm sure the determination was made then that they were not going to evacuate all of us to another facility where again we would all be housed together in a super small confined space. And you know, that's crazy to think about because prison is already a super small confined space. Imagine just how much worse that could be, being evacuated from a prison to another prison to be housed wherever they could find room to house you at. But even though we would only end up getting hit by the corner of this hurricane, the institution was still placed on lockdown. We were still locked inside of our cells. The water still ended up being cut off. We were fed inside of our cells through a little tray slot, bagged lunches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we ended up remaining on this lockdown for I think like a total of 3 days. But just imagine being locked up in a cell with no running water. The only water that you get is water that they bring you in a cooler to where you can put your cup inside of that cooler to get water out of it. And then the absolutely disgusting smell that comes from an entire cell block full of prisoners using the bathroom in toilets that they cannot flush. I mean, it legitimately smelled like a septic tank inside of this cell block for these 3 days. And you know, as I'm telling you this and reliving this, and even with the fact that this was a pretty bad experience to go through with no running water, eating bag lunches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, not being able to take a shower, not knowing what's going on out there in the free world with your loved ones who could be getting hit by this storm a hell of a lot worse, even with how bad all of this really was to go through and how stressful and disgusting it was on top of that, this experience that I went through is nothing in comparison to what prisoners are going through down in the state of Texas at this federal prison called Beaumont, where this prison was more directly affected by the hurricane that hit down there, and these prisoners ended up not being evacuated from this prison. And with that, they've had to deal with way worse situations than what I went through back in 2003. These guys are dealing with ankle-high sewage water due to toilets overflowing and flooding taking place down there. These guys are barely even getting water down there, guaranteed to be eating bag lunches in ankle-high doo-doo water, and are being forced to use the bathroom inside of bags that the guards are giving to them. You want to talk about some inhumane conditions? I can't even imagine what these guys are going through. The closest that I can relate this to is being in isolation while guys are flooding their cells and shit water is everywhere. And you know, I was in that situation because I got in trouble while being locked up. Granted, these guys got in trouble and are locked up because of whatever they did. But even with that, I mean, you really got to think about humane conditions. Because what these guys are going through down in Texas, these are the absolute epitome of completely inhumane conditions. And you know, if you wonder, well, why weren't these guys evacuated? Well, let me just throw out a few things for you as to why they possibly weren't. One, you can probably imagine that it cost a small fortune to transfer all of these prisoners from one facility to another. Think of how many buses they're gonna need, how much staff they're gonna need on hand. So maybe the Bureau of Prisons thought it would be more cost effective to just leave these guys where they were and just let them weather the storm the best way that they could. Or two, maybe the Bureau of Prisons just didn't give a damn about these guys who were locked up. Maybe they had bigger issues to worry about, like saving their own selves. Because let me put this out there for you to think about too. Anytime there is a natural disaster or any kind of catastrophic situation that's taking place, you can rest assured that the last people's safety that's going to be thought about is guaranteed to be guys who are locked up in prison. Again, going through and trying to survive a hurricane is a scary enough experience. But then add to that being locked up during one. Certainly some pretty crazy shit to think about. Hey, look, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did so, please leave a like and a comment letting me know exactly what you thought about this. As always, until next time, enjoy life, the free world, never take a moment for granted, and make the most of every day. Peace!